As people are coming into our team meeting, I want to say good afternoon to you all. Thank you for attending this first webinar from our fourth webinar cycle entitled, Is Sustainable the New Healthy? Before we start, I will share a few information about how this webinar runs. For further viewing, we are recording this session, so if you do not wish to appear, you can turn off your cameras. Our speakers, which are 3 speakers, will have a 15-minute presentation each, followed by Q&A. So feel free to post your questions in the Teams chat. Please mention the name of the speaker you are addressing the question to. This webinar should be finished by 5:30 p.m. because I have to pick up my boys at school. And before we start, I invite you to check our website. We will have a busy summer with several events taking place, like EIT Food Summer School, Grow Workshops, and the Field Local, all taking place this July. We are sharing the link to our website in the Teams chat. As I said, I'm Cecília Franco. Me and my colleague Catarina Vasconcelos, we are both nutritionists and health and well-being specialists at Food for Sustainability. For the last months, on our past webinars, we have been talking about regenerative agriculture, carbon sequestration, and digital tools for sustainable agriculture. So these are great and super important topics that guide our values in Food for Sustainability Collab. And today, we will continue our knowledge transfer until the end of the value chain and focus on another strategic pillar of our work, which is functional nutrition and sustainable consumption. So let's start by looking at the title of this webinar cycle, which is a little bit provocative, can we say. We have to ask ourselves, is sustainable the new healthy? What do we mean by this question? We can say that healthy diets are on trend, whether it's the Mediterranean diet, the paleo diet, vegan diet, soup diet, you name it. When someone chooses to embrace one of these diets, their focus lies on health matters like losing weight, gaining muscle, recovering from illness, preventing disease. Even Google Trends, I don't know if you tried Google Trends, it will tell us that healthy diets are more popular than sustainable diets. You can see the healthy diets being this blue line. They are way more popular than the sustainable diets, at least for the last 5 years. This gives us the popularity of the search terms healthy diets and sustainable diets. This can mean that when someone reaches the grocery aisle, what goes on their mind might be something like this. Is this fattening? Is this low sugar, fat and salt? Is this high in fiber? Does this lower my cholesterol? Is this good or bad for my health? So what we want to question today is, are we on the way to changing our consumption focus? When we do grocery shoppings, we will be asking different questions when choosing our foods. Maybe, is this produced locally and in season? Is this fair trade cocoa? Does this have deforestation-free ingredients? Are the workers being paid fair wages? What's the carbon and water footprint of this product? We do not mean to say that having health concerns when choosing what goes on our plate is bad. What we are trying to say is that we might need to add some more layers of assumptions to make better choices. So will the sustainable diet become a new trend? And why we may not have this answer by the end of these webinars, because only time will be able to show us that, we will be leaving with plenty of food for thought. And I leave you with a short video on this theme. Why should sustainable healthy diets become a new trend?
You know the saying, you are what you eat. But the way we currently eat is in fact ruining our health. The health of others and that of the planet. Unhealthy food is now deadlier than alcohol, drug and tobacco use combined. 2.1 billion people are overweight, yet we eat more sugar, fat and red meat than ever. Still, 821 million go to bed hungry every night. On top of that, our food is the main cause behind species extinction and a third of all global greenhouse gas emissions. So, can we feed a growing population without destroying the planet and ourselves? Science had no clear answer to this question. That's why EAT gathered 37 of the world's best scientists to determine what a healthy and sustainable diet is and how to get there. The result is the EAT Lancet Commission, a scientific blueprint for a healthy and sustainable future. If we change the way we produce, consume, transport and waste food, we can feed everyone a healthy diet while improving the health of our planet. What does this look like? Meat can stay on our plate, but plants need to be the new main course. We should eat a huge variety of fruits and vegetables and a low amount of meat, dairy and seafood. We should choose unsaturated fats and stay away from refined grains, highly processed foods and added sugars. And we have no food to waste. It will take huge changes, but following this plan will lower our risk of cancer, strokes and diabetes. It could help avoid 11 million adult deaths per year. In fact, consuming and producing food more efficiently and mindfully will help to keep our planet flourishing. We have an answer now. We know the right course for a better future. It's on us to actually take that step. Our food can be the key to solving the biggest challenges we face. Food really can fix it.
So this is only one approach to a possible solution. And I pass the floor to Catarina.
Hi, thank you. So good afternoon, everyone. Before presenting our distinguished guests, let's sum up what we'll have on the menu for the next 3 Thursdays. So by the end of this webinar cycle, you will have heard about different perspectives, dimensions of what it means to eat healthy and sustainable, having the opportunity to understand how it can be translated and implemented in different contexts. For example, in a school meal, or a product development with municipalities or even with big retailers. So for today, we will try to address the impact of our food choices and eating patterns on the environment, health and society. What does entail in a transition to a sustainable and healthy diet? Do we have the appetite for change? Next Thursday, we will then explore practical examples of how to promote the concept of a sustainable and healthy diet through, for example, school meals, public food procurement, and food education. Can school meals impact and promote an effective change? How can we educate and motivate the next generations to eat healthy and sustainable? And finally, in the last webinar, we will finish the cycle with a focus on product and service development, willing to understand the main challenge and innovative solutions companies are developing to embrace this sustainable food transition. So we will have promising sessions and we will challenge our speakers to explore this complex and exciting topic. So let's meet our speakers for today. We will have João Graça, Sara, Moreno, Pires, and Pamela Mason. We will start with João Graça, that will talk us about the social challenge and opportunities to enable sustainable food transitions. So João works as an associate researcher at the University of Lisbon and an assistant professor at the University of Groningen, if I say it right, in the Netherlands. His overall research program is to identify pathways towards sustainability and develop communication models and products that help to materialize these pathways. Focal topics include sustainable food consumption and safeguarding of vulnerable population. So, João Graça, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Catarina. Let me try to share my screen. I assume it's working, right?
Yes,
we can see
Okay, thank you. Good. So, well, thank you for the opportunity to join this webinar. Let's talk for a few minutes about social challenges and opportunities to enable sustainable food transitions. And to kick off the conversation, I think we need to acknowledge where we are and where we come from. So if we look back, we see that the current food system has been established to achieve basically one main vision, which was to feed a growing population in a way that is economically viable. Of course, we still have major inequalities in terms of access to safe and secure food and nutrition. But when we consider where we come from, I think we can acknowledge that there has been a remarkable progress in achieving this vision. So in the last couple of centuries, we have been able to support an unprecedented increase in the global population. But of course, this vision and this system have caused quite severe negative externalities that were not anticipated when the vision was first advanced. And these include the health and environmental problems that we are all aware of now and that we are even discussing in this session. And if these problems continue to be unaddressed, we may actually even come to lose a silver lining in this scenario and unfortunately be left mostly with having to deal with these horrible negative externalities, which will very likely increase the existing inequalities in terms of access to safe and to secure food and nutrition. So this calls for a new vision for our food systems, so one which feeds a growing population in a way that is economically viable. So feeding the people is still at the core of this vision, but we need to do this in a way that supports and connects the environment, health, and ecocentric human prosperity. So ecocentric versus anthropocentric. This basically means human prosperity that is built with other forms of life and not at the expense of other forms of life and the natural environment. And we need to connect each of these domains with each other, and we need to connect them with the food that we place every day in our plate. So there's a range of things that need to happen to materialize this new vision. Of course, there are no silver bullets, but one of these things is to promote large-scale changes towards increased plant-based eating. This infographic here shows that plant-based foods tend to have lower environmental impacts across several dimensions when compared to animal-sourced products. This recent study published on Nature also emphasizes that protecting biodiversity will require both production side and demand side measures in food systems. And these measures include a shift to increased plant-based eating. And this recent one from Science focuses on greenhouse gas emissions and reaches a similar conclusion. So plant-rich diets are necessary, so that's that green bar there, necessary to reach our climate targets. So in short, we have inputs from independent research teams, independent labs that keep feeding this increasingly established consensus, which is that to move towards more sustainable food systems, we need to enable what I would call here plant-forward transitions. And of course, again, this is not a self-standing solution. We also need to optimize production, reduce waste. Well, this was mentioned in that very nice introductory video. But it does seem, so enabling these transitions, these plant-forward transitions, seems to be a particularly challenging measure to promote these sustainable food systems. And it really is far from easy. So this graph shows the levels of global meat production, and I think it really nicely illustrates the scale of the problem. So meat production has more than quadrupled in the last 50 years. And what is worse is that it is expected to actually keep increasing in the forthcoming decades. And in fact, we really don't have a clear solution to enable these changes towards more plant-forward transitions. Food production and consumption are grounded on processes that are socially complex. They are interdependent. They are determined by, countless different variables. Large-scale transitions will require massive changes in behavior. And even if we enable these changes, the fact is that they may trigger chains of events that may have unforeseen outcomes. So the very changes that we're trying to promote may also have unforeseen outcomes. So I would argue that plant-forward transitions probably check all boxes to be seen as a wicked problem. There's quite a lot of literature about wicked problems, mostly in the field of governance. We will not delve into that here. And of course, we don't have a solution for this problem, but we do have a research program that is trying to provide inputs to try to, well, come up with solutions or ideas that may help us push things in the right direction. So this research program in which I've been involved in the last few years includes a number of studies, a number of projects that I usually group under these three axes. So the first one, how to encourage and empower consumers to eat more plant-based meals. Then a second one, how to trigger and sustain these large-scale transitions towards increased plant-based eating. And then how to promote biocentric or ecocentric instead of anthropocentric relations between humans, non-humans, and the natural environments. Time is very limited today, so I thought to just share very briefly an example, showcase one example from the first axis and from the second axis. So we will have to leave the third one for another time. So let's see an example from the first one. This was a study that introduced and applied the concept of consumption orientations. This is from a project that was funded by Missão Continente, o Grande Inquérito da Sustentabilidade. And when we talk about consumption orientations, we can refer to general consumption orientations and also to food consumption orientations in particular. So first, let's focus on general consumption orientations. We define this as the shared meanings that people internalize, that people display towards goods and services during processes of acquisition, appropriation, appreciation, and disposal in everyday life. So basically, the meanings that people internalize and display during processes of consumption. So basically, these acquisition, appropriation, appreciation, disposal are the steps linked with consumption. Let's try to make this a bit more intelligible and tangible with some examples. So this may include orientations towards choice, so people that really value having as many choices as possible for a given product or a given service. Orientations towards ethics, so a tendency to consider how our consumption may impact others or may impact the environment, and consumption orientations towards exploration, so tendency to try out new products, to try out new experiences. And of course, these are just three examples. You have a range of different consumption orientations. Food consumption orientations in particular are essentially the main motivations, the main justifications that people advance for eating what they eat in everyday life. Usually you also refer to this as food motives, and these may include, again, just a few examples, orientations towards health, so eating what I think is healthy and makes me healthier, which is also, I think, very nicely illustrated in this in our opening talk today in this webinar. Convenience, so eating what's more accessible and what's more easy to prepare. This is also food consumption orientation. Another one is pleasure, so basically eating what makes me feel good. We have naturalness, eating what I think is natural, what I think is pure. Social image, eating what I think makes me look good in front of others. And again, this is just a snapshot of a range of diverse food consumption orientations. So findings with a sample, a representative sample of the Portuguese population allowed us to identify trends and differences on, we were talking about trends also in the opening session, trends and differences on three sets of variables. So first, current eating habits, how often people eat meals with meat, meals with fish, plant-based meals. Consumer willingness to change, so how willing are they to reduce their meat consumption, to follow plant-based diet, or are they just more inclined to just maintain the status quo and not really change their habits. And the third set of variables, enablers for eating plant-based meals more often. Again, all of this, so current eating habits, consumer willingness to change, and these enablers to eat plant-based meals more often were considered in light of these consumption orientations. So consumption orientations towards consumption in general and towards food consumption in particular. So what were these trends and differences that we identified in our study? First, and not surprisingly, consumption orientations already linked with this transition were general orientations towards prosumerism and ethics, and food consumption orientations towards health and naturalness. And basically, this suggests that existing products, existing marketing and communication strategies are probably already appealing to these types of consumers, which is really important, but I would argue not sufficient for a widespread change, simply because not everyone shares these consumption orientations, right? So we also found a number of orientations that are not yet linked with a transition, but showing some permeability, showing some promising opportunities for change. These were general orientations towards communication and exploration, and food orientations towards price and sociability. But we also identified some orientations that were in tension with this transition, namely general orientations towards choice and food orientations towards social image and pleasure. So we argue that there's a need to push everything from the red light and the green light and the yellow light to the green light. And basically this means we need to be able to capture and build upon a range and a diversity of consumption orientations instead of against these orientations. So in other words, focusing on ethics, focusing on health, on perceived naturalness at the expense of choice, social image, pleasure, may very well leave some consumers behind. And I think this highlights the need for the industry, for marketing, retailers to create new solutions that will appeal to increasingly larger numbers of consumers. So sustainable consumption and healthy consumption, by the way, cannot remain a niche for people who care about health, about ethics, about the environment, or even a trend for people who care about health, ethics, and the environment, simply because not everyone cares about health, ethics, and the environment. So we really need to find creative and innovative solutions to make sure that we have a range of products, a range of solutions, a range of strategies to cater for everyone's preferences and needs as consumers. We can discuss this a bit further when we have time for questions, but for now let's jump straight to an example from the second axis, triggering large-scale transitions. And I thought it would be nice to share something from this project that we have ongoing, the Sustainable School Meals, which is supported by national and European funds. The aim here was to promote a shift toward increasingly plant-based eating in schools, focusing both on individual consumer level variables, so in this case students, and on shared context-based variables, so in this case schools and canteens and cafeterias. The project had 3 work streams. We don't have time to go through them here, so I will just fast forward and share just a snapshot of one of the outputs of the project. So this study with stakeholders on how to enable sustainable food transitions in schools. So we collected data with stakeholders at diverse levels of influence in the school meal system. So we consider the proximal, intermediate, and distal levels. So these different shades here of color that you have in the circle. And we interviewed, a number of participants, from end consumers to food providers, market actors, civil society organizations, policy and decision makers. And again, just to give a snapshot of our findings, we found that meat-centric cultural perceptions of a proper meal were identified as a barrier for sustainable food transitions in schools. So this attachment to meat consumption is a real problem. The idea that vegetarian meals are for vegetarian students is a problem, instead of being just meals that are suited for basically all students. So this was a real barrier, but we also identified some pathways to unlock these transitions, namely the first one, levering orientations towards ethical and environmentally beneficial consumption, with a number of ideas and activities under this theme. Then a second one, improving and increasing the offer of plant-based meals, again, promoting staff training, increase sensory appeal and variety, increase food literacy, improve the nutritional profile of plant-based meals. So all these ideas here. And then a third theme, mobilizing local communities and societies, also with a number of ideas and activities under this pathway that we expand a bit more in the discussion. So, unsurprisingly, I would highlight as the key message that unlocking these changes would require systemic, integrated approaches with a focus on food consumption. Of course, that's absolutely critical, but it's not sufficient. At least that's what the findings suggest. So we also need to take into account food provision and the broader political and socio-cultural environment as a whole. But again, you can check the paper. It's open access in case you're curious to read more. And we can also have time for questions, of course. You can also check the website where we share some updates and developments. And yeah, we don't have time for an example from the third axis, but perhaps in another occasion. This is my contact information in case you want to reach out, and I will be happy to answer any questions or comments that you might have. So I think I was on time.
Thank you so much. I mean, we would like to be here for much longer to continue to hear your presentations but it occurs to me one first question. You have a background as a psychologist.
Yeah, social psychology.
Yes, and from your experience, what would work better if we only had two solutions to invite people to change their eating patterns? Mm-hmm. Let's say one eating pattern in particular, reduce meat consumption. What mm-hmm. would work better, a reward system or a punishment system? In some way, punishment in some way.
Yeah, I would say that there's no one size
animals,
fits all.
So we like to be rewarded, but maybe we don't change with rewards. I don't know.
Yeah, I would say that there's really not a one size fits all solution, because you have diverse profiles, diverse patterns of needs and preferences. You have people with prevention orientations. You have people with approach motivations. So it's really and one of the main conclusions of every time we run studies in which we use some kind of clustering techniques with multiple correspondence analysis or whatever, what's striking is that we have different patterns of consumers. So I'm really against saying that you have a single approach that will work and that will be equally effective for people with such diverse needs and preferences and expectations. I mean, that's also one of the takeaways from the first study. So I really think we need diversity. Mm-hmm. We need to embrace diversity, and we need to have different teams, different actors working on pushing things in the right direction. And this will, I think that's we need diverse approaches and integrated.
I agree. And I just remember that because a few weeks ago we were looking at this particular call. And at some point they were asking us the same question. I mean, is it important, or would people value reward programs in order to change their eating habits? And it made us question, because not all of us would work with a reward system. Some of us would only change under punishment. I don't know, but we are different, and we have different motivations to change. It's true. And
they're not mutually exclusive, right? I don't know what you mean with punishment, but
I mean, maybe I'm using the wrong words. I apologize if I'm not applying the right English words. Maybe not punishment like in a physical way, but like losing benefits in some way. I don't know, some way in we would lose benefits in some way.
Yeah, like for instance, raising prices or raising taxes. Or,
yes.
Yeah. But I would say those are not necessarily mutually exclusive, but there's nuance there, right? So for every measure, you need to account for possible unintended consequences, and I don't think there's an easy answer for that, to be honest.
I know, I agree, and I would ask you another difficult question. We are humans. We take. You were saying that in the last 50 years the meat production raised incredibly, and it will keep raising. Mm-hmm. I mean, my question is, how long will it take us, or will it possibly take us to actually see any changes in the trends in healthy versus sustainable. It doesn't need to be versus. It needs to be healthy and sustainable. When will we be able to see any raising in this trend?
I mean, the trends are already there, but it is really problematic. So I was just reading a paper published this week with data from the Netherlands and Belgium, which we usually think, oh, these countries are really at the forefront of these changes. So, for instance, in the Netherlands, people eat an average of, I think, 70-something kilos of meat per capita, and everyone agrees it's just too much. And in Portugal, numbers that I've seen from INE, what was it, like 114 kilos? I don't even remember. And there's still sometimes a discussion, oh, do we eat too much? So, but this is to illustrate, even in the Netherlands and Belgium, which is, again, we tend to see these countries at the forefront of these changes, there's data suggesting that an increasing awareness and intentions, and even some clusters of consumers reducing their meat consumption, eating plant-based, following plant-based diets. When you take the pattern of production and consumption overall, like at the country level, meat production and consumption didn't suffer from, it wasn't affected by these trends, which is really remarkable, right? Because we always hear of these trends, these promising developments, but then when you look at the data, this is not enough. No, and quite the opposite. It's not only not enough, I mean, there's no progress. So if you look at it from a certain angle and with using a certain lens, well, these trends are so exciting. But if you look, if you have this bird's eye view of what's actually happening, it's not only not enough, it's actually not improving.
No, we are condemned.
I wouldn't go, I mean, I sometimes I'm more pessimistic than other times, but if we look right now at the current reality, I would say that things aren't looking good, and we're clearly not doing enough.
Well, Catarina, would you like to add any other question? Are there any questions in the chat?
Yeah, we have questions here in the chat. Maybe I can highlight. Claudia is thanking you for a great presentation. And she said that you have pointed to several avenues toward more sustainable habits. Can you give a concrete example of a country, region, institution that has achieved some of these goals, and what were the exact steps that they took?
Well, again, this really connects nicely with what we were saying, right? So we usually think of, for instance, Netherlands, Belgium as countries that are at the forefront of these changes. But even here, you have so much resistance. So there's this new agenda to buy out farmers to reduce nitrogen emissions in the Netherlands, and this is quite progressive, right? In the sense that it is what needs to happen to lower the environmental impact of food production, but. Then there's so much backlash against these. So even the country, even the party that is basically leading the coalition, so they have this plan to buy out farmers and reduce nitrogen emissions. But even the party is against the measure that was proposed by the government. But actually, the government, the party is leading the coalition, but then not even within the party, you have consensus that, everyone agrees that we need to do something to reduce the impact of human activity on the environment. But then when you actually try to take these more structural measures, there's so much backlash, there's so much resistance.
There's much interest.
Yeah, exactly. It's difficult, but of course there are other symbolic measures that are really important. For instance, to shape perceived norms and social norms, such as also this also happened in the Netherlands. So a number of universities took the plant-based as the default option, and public institutions as well. So plant-based would be the default option in events that involve some kind of catering. So if you really want to have a meal with meat or fish, you can still ask for one, but then the default will be just having a plant-based meal. This is a very simple measure that has a really low potential to cause some kind of backlash or reactance, but is still important in the sense that it helps shape I think, perceived norms. So again, this would take us a long time to really flesh out all the different nuances and the range of things that have been done and that can be done in the future. But achieving goals, so that has achieved some of the goals, again, I'm a bit pessimistic in the sense, or if you look at things realistically, we have these trends and that's really good. So I'm not discouraging these movements, but it's clearly not enough. So we have, in my view, not achieved some of these goals yet.
Great. So maybe we have a link to, maybe you already answered, but Daniela is here in the chat as well, congratulating you for the presentation. And she was wondering if you could share your vision if this vegetable meals adoption by general population is the solution. And for you, what do you think it's a sustainable diet? So challenging again.
Share your vision on the vegetable meals. Yeah, again, I think this is linked with what we found in the first study, right? So we have some, it's a niche, right? So we have some groups of consumers that are, well, already on board with this transition, but that's not the case for, I would say, very large segments of consumers. And for me, what is a sustainable diet? Again, it's a diet, or I sometimes even think about, instead of thinking about diets, I like to think in terms of the units, which is the actual meal. Because diet is really, well, it's for us, at least, I think, for us as consumers, it's harder to think in terms of diet than meal. So what is a sustainable meal? I would say that it's a meal that really lowers our negative impacts on the environment, nurtures our health, and helps us thrive with other forms of life and not at the expense of other forms of life and the natural environment. So that's, for me, a sustainable meal. And then if you take the aggregate sum of meals, then you have a sustainable diet. And every meal counts. Every meal matters.
Exactly. Great.
Thank you.
So,
Catarina, would you like to present our
Yeah, we are just
speaker?
on time, so
Yes.
we need to move to the next speaker and talking about low impact emissions and low impact meals. We have now Sara Moreno Pires talking with us about the unsustainable food footprint of Portuguese diet. So Sara works as a researcher at the Government Competitiveness and Public Policy Research Unit and is an assistant professor of public policy at the Department of Social, Political and Territorial Science of the University of Aveiro. She has a PhD in Applied Environmental Sciences, a Master in Development and Planning, Environment and Sustainable Development, and a degree in Economics. She has focused her research on sustainable development policies, urban sustainability, territorial-based innovation, and local governments, and collaborated with municipalities, NGOs, companies in the area of sustainable development and human rights. So, Sara, thank you so much for your availability, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good afternoon to all. I hope you can hear me well. I will start soon to share my presentation. Give me a minute. Hope you can see. Yeah?
Yes, it's working.
Okay, great. Well, I was really excited with the... Can you hear me?
Yes,
okay.
Yes.
I was really excited already with the talk of João, because a lot of the discussion is connected to what I'm presenting to you, the results of a study that we have been conducted in Portugal that lead us to this title of the unsustainable and the more pessimistic view, as João said, about the food footprint of the Portuguese diets. So, just to start with, of the overview of the environmental pressures that the Portuguese people do, is that if everybody in the world consumed like a Portuguese, we would finish our resources that were available for 1 year, for the whole year, on the 7th of May. And this is for this year. Last year was on the 13th of May. That means that we are pushing ever and ever again more these limits, so we are ending up our natural resources before every or earlier in the year after year. So this is a very important challenge that it also shows us how difficult it is to prevent or to decouple economic growth from environmental pressures, because we realize that, of course, when we had the pandemics, our footprint decreased and our overshoot day was postponed until June. But as soon as we started to recover from the pandemics already last year, this year, we came back to May. So we are pushing this pressure over and over again, and we wonder why am I talking about this and why food is so important in this perspective. So this way of assessing our overshoot day is given by the ecological footprint. And the ecological footprint can show us the pressure that we do regarding our demand for natural resources, for ecosystem services, in like 5 main categories of land use. So we need forest products, we need fish from the fisheries, we need to eat meat or plant-based from cropland and pasture. We need build-up land for our schools, housing, and so on. And we also need some land to absorb our carbon emissions. So we have also to assess how much land we need to absorb all our consumption emissions, let's say. So the ecological footprint, in one way, it's a very interesting overall view of our environmental pressures because it focuses on the consumption side. So it assesses the pressure that we put on Earth regarding our consumption in one territory, regardless of where it is produced. So it means that if we look to Portugal, everything that is produced in Portugal and we consume in Portugal is Portuguese footprint, and everything that we import from other countries and consume here, it's also our footprint. But if we produce here, for instance, olive oil, let's say, and if we sell it to Spain, it's not our footprint. So we produce here, the environmental impacts are here, we feel them here, here, but if we sell them to another country, it counts as the ecological footprint of that country. So it's a consumption base. Where it is consumed, it's the footprint that we assessed. So in Portugal, if we look back at over the period since already 1960s, we can see that we were consuming more than our capacity to generate resources. So if we assess our biocapacity of Portugal, we can see that already in the 60s, we were consuming more than we have in our country. Of course, we can consume other countries' biocapacity. That's what we have been doing for already the 60s. But you can see a very increasing trend since we entered the European Union, and a lot of parallel with the economic recessions or economic flows. But so far, we are putting this amount of pressure and a growing pressure over the natural resources. So we conducted a study in Portugal with the Global Footprint Network, that is the NGO that has this recognition of the methodology, of the ecological footprint methodology, with the NGO of the Portuguese NGO Zero, and with the University of Aveiro, because we wanted to know why Portugal has such a high footprint, and can we make it available to assess at the local level how municipalities or cities behave? Do they behave differently? Do they have different impacts, and why? And we tried to do this since 2018, and the project now, it ended last year. So one of our conclusions was that regarding the Portuguese at the national level, the Portuguese context, the impact we were consuming in 2018 almost 3 times more than our biocapacity per person. And the main topic or the main driver, and that's the reason why I am here discussing with you the relevance of food, is because in our country, food is the main driver of our ecological footprint, of our environmental pressure using this methodology. So almost 30% of our footprint, it has to do with the way we consume food. And at the second level, mobility with 17%, and then housing, energy, and other water consumption and so on. So food is a critical issue in Portugal, and we try to understand what type of food, what is the reason, why is this so high? And there are two main reasons, and one is quite interesting because it didn't appear so relevant in João's presentation. João focused more on meat, but we have this unique characteristic in Portugal that fish and seafood in fact has a more relevant impact in terms of footprint than meat consumption. So, but meat and fish and seafood, they are more or less 50% of our footprint in terms of the food. So it means that 50% of our impact of food, it relates to the consumption of protein, of animal protein. So around 24 to 26% of fish and seafood, and then meat, they are really important drivers of our footprint. If we look at different municipalities, the 6 first municipalities that we have assessed, you can see that regarding this regards with the previous assessment of 2016, the trends are quite different, and we can see that, for instance, in one of the cities in the north of Portugal, it has a little bit more pressure on the food, like Bragança, which was quite surprising for us, but more rural and less populated municipalities had a higher impact on food footprint than, for instance, Almada or Gaia, in different ways, that were more populated cities. So the drivers are the same. They keep showing the food intensity in even different municipalities. So we then conducted another assessment to see where is our dependency of this food coming from. So we tried to assess the global footprint that we demand from food, okay, from the different subcategories of food that I will show you here, and how much of the food that we consume in our country is imported from other countries, and what are the top 5 countries that we need their biocapacity to provide us food. And we could see quite important results regarding, for instance, the bread and cereals, how much we are dependent from other countries. So 86% of what we consume comes from the biocapacity of other countries. Ukraine is one of the very important partners that we have here, as you can see. Spain is the main top partner in almost our categories of food. But you can see also these regarding to oils and fats or fruits, where we have more than 50–60% of dependency from other countries. So this is quite impressive because it shows in almost all the categories how much we are dependent and how much we consume, much more than we need in terms of health as well. So regarding fish and seafood, it's quite interesting because we have a long coast. We have a lot of fisheries and fish production in our country, but we still depend 60% on the consumption of of the provision of fish from other countries. Norway, Sweden, and you may understand why, because of cod consumption and so on. So I will briefly bring you just some results of a study that we are finishing now regarding a survey that we did to 1,000 Portuguese residents about the fish and seafood consumption. So we try to understand a little bit with more detail that the footprint analysis, because it's so macro analysis, it doesn't give sometimes the necessary detail that we need for policy making. So we wanted to know a little bit more, and we could find out that, of course, Portugal is a unique country regarding the Mediterranean countries, because it is the only that the footprint is driven by seafood consumption. 80% of our survey respondents said that they report that they eat at least once per week, and older people eat every day fish. The preferences are, so we eat a lot. We eat fish that is footprint intensive. It means that we eat a lot of cod, tuna, salmon, that are high trophic level species, and so they have an impact in the natural resources higher than other types of fish, than sardines and mackerel and so on. And one very interesting thing was that sustainability awareness is not something that influences our consumption choices, the consumption of these residents. So they are not looking for fish regarding the sustainability of their choices. So moving on to the other categories of food, just to finish this, I would like to stress something that I didn't stress before, that apart from in Portugal, we have the capacity to produce a lot of vegetables and a lot of fruit, but we are very much dependent on still vegetables and fruit to provide the food that we eat. 66% of the vegetables we consume come from other countries, and China starts to be a main partner in fruit and in vegetables, which was for us quite surprising regarding all the impacts that this trade can have in several sustainability constraints. So just to end up, our main conclusions was to do this overall assessment, but then to go a little bit down or in the territorial scale, and to look what these 6 municipalities that we assessed, what are they doing in terms of food policies, what are they doing to embrace and to minimize this environmental problem we found out through the ecological footprint. And it's quite surprising that we have, in terms of the maturity of our public policies at the local level, we have for a long time mobility policies, we have environmental policies regarding waste prevention and so on, but we don't have so far the recognition, the awareness that food is an environmental problem and food has to have a specific strategy. Of course, at the local intermunicipal level, but it has to be a target, has to be a political commitment to really understand how to minimize this problem. And so our findings were not so positive because we lack a lot of organizational autonomy, governmental regulations and incentives. We don't have a strong political commitment towards healthy and sustainable diet sets at the local level, but we do found some very good practices that I can share with you after the presentation if you wish, mainly on agri-food and innovation and on the agriculture side of the food system, so the food production and the promotion of connecting the food with territorial planning, for instance, and incentives for farmer citizen recognition. This was a very interesting finding, but we are still lacking an overview of a strategic policy that we need to develop at the local level. And this, of course, has to do because we still don't have at the national level a strong sustainable food policy that can also support the local municipalities to develop their own. So we have a lot of different suggestions, possibilities, challenges to go ahead from the starting of the food system, that means the production part, to all the relevant stakeholders from the distribution, food innovation, transformation, and the consumption part, of course, with no tolerance for food waste or food loss. And I'm starting, it is the signal that I have to stop. Sorry. And of course that, our emphasis is on the need to develop and to support all the different stakeholders and to have different instruments, law, regulations, financial instruments, economic instruments, pushing for a more sustainable and healthy food system in Portugal. So thank you so much. Hope with this we can discuss how we can move more to these sustainable diet concepts in Portugal. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sara. I have, maybe they are not questions, maybe they are just internal questions. What occurs to me is that maybe globalization wasn't so good after all. We will be realizing that at some point, and maybe this, for example, this war in Ukraine has raised or the awareness that we are so dependent on each other on food terms. We are dependent on their cereals at some point, and these common agricultural policies, maybe they aren't so good after all. I mean, at some point they are, but from the footprint perspective, they have their setbacks. Okay, Catarina, you have some questions for Sara.
No, just out of curiosity, we already are running in time, but we have 2 questions here in the chat. I had a personal question just about how did the municipalities react to these data, and if you had the chance to follow up if they did anything different or in terms of policies or strategic thinking regarding food after this study. And then we have here Claudia asking about your research points against globalization. Oops, sorry. This becomes a very complex problem well beyond consumption habits. What would be your main policy recommendations? Where do you think is the starting point? And we have just 2 more, but we can follow then in the chat. Maybe first these 2 and then the next ones.
Well, thank you very much. Of course, they are not easy questions, and I will try to be very brief. But regarding the examples of how the municipalities had react to the data that we showed, just 2 brief examples. For instance, in Bragança, they were really surprised not only for the high ecological footprint of the municipality, higher than the Portuguese average. So it was a surprise for a municipality that considered that they didn't have big environmental problems. And when they recognized that food was one of the main drivers, they were asking us why. But our population is consuming meat from the local production, so maybe we don't have that much impact. And then, of course, this is the reason of the ecological footprint bring us a lot of questions. Sometimes don't give us all the answer that we need, and we need then to find more detailed information. Because the truth is that we don't have data on the local consumption side. And I asked back to the mayor, but do you really know what are your families consuming? Do you really know? Because you know that smoked salmon are in the supermarkets all over the country, and they are caught in Norway. They go to China to take to be prepared, and then go back to Bangladesh to be packed, and then come back to our supermarkets for 2 euros. You can find smoked salmon, even in Bragança. So that means that our diets have shifted very quickly because of globalization, and even in municipalities like Bragança, we can find the impacts of these changes. So we could find a lot of reasons because, and then the municipality started to work a little bit more and to understand why, and work at schools and so on. In Guimarães, it was also very interesting because Guimarães has a long tradition of environmental policies. It's a very interesting municipality to study, an example of good practices in sustainability and environmental problems. And they are now developing their food strategy because of the results of our study. So they are developing because they realized the need to understand a little bit more. They did a family survey as well to understand, to have more data, and they are developing now their food strategy at the local level. So these are 2 examples of consequences of the study. And well, one of the main solution that I would find, I think, coming back to also with what João said, well, we don't have the correct prices in our products, okay? So when you buy something that is very cheap or something that has a certain price, it doesn't count on all the environmental impacts that that food product has. So if you change the value, if you change the prices of the food products, and instead of being the biological ones, the more expensive, they become the cheapest because they have incentives, they have public incentives, they have subsidies, whatever. But if they become cheaper, maybe the consumers will change their behaviors very quickly, as we did for plastic bags. Only with a 2 cents change in the plastic bags, we started to use our own plastic bags. So I'm not sure, maybe I came back to my economics background that I ran away from, but I don't know, but changing the price, we still, in everything, not only in food, but we don't value the right things. Our economic system is not valuing the benefits of a tree, and we only value the tree when we cut it and when it provides us a monetary value. So we need to change the value or the way we value the products, and food must be more expensive if it has an impact on health and environment. But then we go back to a lot of social and social problems and inequalities that also João told us how to do this.
I agree. I finished with a teasing. Considering this time of the year, we are popularly speaking, we eat sardines at this time of year here in Portugal. And the fishermen are paid for 20 euros the box full of sardines, and the sardines will cost 2 euros each at the selling point. So there's something wrong in this.
And it has to do with all these actors that are in the food system. And so if you value more the fisherman, and if you value more the fish, and sardines are a very good fish to eat.
It's true.
In terms of the ecological footprint, if our stock is not at risk, of course.
Yes.
Okay. But that's exactly the problem. We don't pay the fishermen and the producers, the agriculture farmers. We don't pay them the fair price.
True. Thank you so much, Sara.
So
Catarina, would you like to present Pamela?
No, yes, sorry. Because we are running late on time. I was just commenting maybe the next webinar should be about the true cost accounting of food, because it's a really, really interesting and hot topic to talk. But yeah, we are running late, and so sorry to Anna and Rita and Daniela in the chat, but I'm sure that your questions are related to the next speaker as well. So last but not least, we have the pleasure to present Pamela Mason. And Pamela we'll talk about healthy and sustainable diets. How can dietetic and nutrition professionals contribute? So Dr. Pamela Mason is a registered public health nutritionist with a master in food policy and a particular interest in sustainable diets. She has written nutrition-related papers in the academic and professional press over 30 years. Most recently, she has co-authored a book called Sustainable Diets with Professor Tim Lang from City University in London. Back to you, Professor Pamela Mason.
Catarina, thank you very much. Can everybody hear me? Can you see my presentation?
Not yet. The presentation.
Well, we can see now, yes?
Yeah, perfect. Just on the slideshow mode and we are ready.
That's it, isn't it? Yep.
Yes, it's working.
See that? Okay, thank you. I'm sorry, I'm not so familiar with giving a presentation on Teams, so it's a bit of a slow start. The two presentations that I've heard already were absolutely great, and certainly in terms of dietetic and nutritional professionals, I mean, hugely significant lessons, I think. I was fascinated about to learn about the footprint of fish in the Portuguese diet. And particularly in the context of dietitians certainly I think all over Europe, being encouraged to advise people to eat more fish. And I think Sara very interestingly showed us what could happen if dietitians really did that. She quoted as very nice statistics, saying, I think that most people eat fish at least once a day, and older people eat a lot more. Yeah, just a very interesting impact on the food footprint. And the first speaker from Groningen, also a very interesting lesson for dietitians and nutritionists, also when advising the public that behaviour, cultural change and inequalities are things really to bear in mind, in addition to what one might call the more straightforward and advice and information as a dietitian might give. Okay, without further ado then, I'll continue with my presentation. Just to clarify really that we're all on the same page, which I know we are, this is a definition of sustainable diet, which I'm sure you've all seen before. And I like this definition very much. It summarises beautifully, I think, what our speaker from Groningen was talking about, the links between the different aspects of diet. So sustainable diets are those diets with low environmental impacts, which contribute to food and nutrition security and to healthy life for present and future generations. And sustainable diets are protective and respectful of biodiversity and ecosystems, culturally acceptable, accessible, economically fair and affordable, nutritionally adequate, safe and healthy, while optimising natural and human resources. Okay, that is a bit of a mouthful, but I think it's a very important mouthful because it does show all the linkages between healthy diet, sustainable diet, biodiversity, fairness to food producers, and some of the things which our earlier speakers have been talking about. The case for sustainable diets, as you will know, the evidence is very, very powerful, certainly around the environment, which we are focusing on quite a lot today. So climate change, water, land use, biodiversity and resource use, specifically nitrogen and phosphate in fertilisers. The evidence is certainly very powerful around health, hunger and obesity, diet-related disease, and the nutrition transition, which is making diets around the world worse. Economics, prices, we've heard already a lot around inequalities and the price of food, and the potential to include externalities, which I think is a very interesting debate in itself, as Catarina has already alluded to. To discuss externalities, I think, is very important because we can increase the price of food, for example, but then particularly at the moment where every country in Europe and indeed around the world has got these terrific cost of food and fuel, cost of living rises, then I think it's quite a difficult thing to say, really, that the price of food should rise, and yet the externalities are not factored in. So that too is quite a wicked problem, I think. Animal welfare and use of antibiotics, again, a strong issue for sustainable diets, and around the whole issue and need of consuming animal produce as part of diet. So just to summarise, what are the environmental impacts of food and agriculture? Greenhouse gases, as we've heard already, 26% of global greenhouse gas emissions are related to food. Land use is a really big one, and particularly in terms of changing land use, as things like, particularly things like digging up the rainforest in the Amazon is an oft-used example, but changing land use really right throughout the world, often to grow feed for animals. Freshwater use, food's responsible for 70% of global freshwater withdrawals, and eutrophication in terms of global ocean and freshwater pollution, a huge thing around agriculture, and biodiversity, which we have been losing massively over the last 100 years. And without a biodiverse planet in terms of nature, then it's going to be very, very difficult to produce the food we need So huge environmental impacts of food and agriculture. A slide here just summarising greenhouse gas emissions across the supply chain. I won't dwell too much on this. You'll be able to access the slides after. Beef, of course, is the very biggest, and lamb, indeed all the animal produce, mainly responsible for the greenhouse gas emissions across the supply chain. And again, you'll see there land use change responsible for a significant proportion. And the farming itself being significantly responsible for the greenhouse gas emissions. But processing and transport are in there as well. Retail is in there, of course, and packaging. What this slide doesn't include, of course, is food waste, which is, again, massively responsible for greenhouse gas emissions across the supply and consumer chain. Okay, of particular interest, I think, to nutritionists and dietitians is that we can show that we need to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in the food supply chain. But what difference will it make if we do advise the public, if we do advise our clients to switch diets, reduce meat intake, try a vegan diet? What will happen? And I think this slide neatly shows that we do actually see significant reductions in greenhouse gas emissions by changing diets. No surprises there that reducing meat consumption shows the greatest reduction. But culturally, that's going to be very difficult. It's going to be very difficult for significant numbers of people in Europe. And if you go right down towards the bottom of that slide, you will see there that balanced energy intake, which again, of course, is a significant need in terms of weight management, that if we only balanced our energy intake and did nothing else, we would still reduce our greenhouse gas emissions quite significantly. And if we followed a healthy diet, and most countries in Europe, of course, have healthy diet guidelines, then again, we would reduce our greenhouse gas emissions significantly. So it's not just about following a no-meat diet, as good as that might be in terms of reducing greenhouse gas emissions, but a healthy diet and or a balanced energy diet. Healthy diet would be a balanced energy diet, of course, that can have a significant impact. This was a study done in 2014, which actually shows that the recommended Dutch diet, i.e. the Dutch dietary guidelines, that would have a lower greenhouse gas emission impact than the average Dutch diet, which is consumed at the moment, but a higher greenhouse gas emission impact than a vegetarian, vegan or Mediterranean diet. But nonetheless, recommended Dutch healthy diet would still reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And for dietetic and nutrition advice, I mean, I think that is the way to start because of the huge cultural issues in making dramatic changes to diet. This, I think, is a very interesting study which has been published just very recently. We talk about reduction in meat, we talk about plant-based diets, we talk about more fruit and vegetables, all of which, of course, are vitally essential for health and sustainability. But what about incorporation of the novel types of foods in European diets? What do I mean by novel foods? It might be things like plant-based beef burgers. It might include, in the future, it might include meat-type products produced by bacterial fermentation, even cell-based meat, as long in the future as that might be. But incorporation of novel foods in European diets, I think this slide nicely shows that they could have huge impact on global warming. It may not be a way forward that all of us would want to recommend. I would far rather that people made the healthy, sustainable dietary changes from unprocessed food, from the types of food that we have at the moment: beans, vegetables, pulses, fish, and so on. But nonetheless, we do eat a lot of processed food, and this is slightly different from novel foods, but we do eat quite a lot of processed food across Europe, as you will know. In the UK, it's more than 60%. It would be great if we could get people to reduce their intake of those processed foods for health reasons, because they're often high in fat and sugar. But I think we also have to be realistic, and in caring about the planet, it may be that both novel foods and indeed some processed foods, if we could improve formulation, say put more plant-based protein in, more fibre and so on, it could be that processed foods and indeed novel foods could make a contribution to the diets, particularly of very, very busy people, if the price could be right. Okay, this was a study a few years ago in France, which actually found that some real-life healthier diets have higher greenhouse gas emissions than unhealthy diets. Again, no surprise about the nature of those diets. A lot of people following healthy diets may eat certain types of fresh meat and dairy, and some types of fruits, which are transported and flown a long way. Okay, so what are we thinking about in terms of sustainable healthy diets? What about the health aspect? What does it really mean? So starting early in life with breastfeeding, of course, and a sustainable healthy diet should be based on a great variety of unprocessed or minimally processed foods, balanced across food groups while restricting highly processed foods and drink products. It would include whole grains, legumes, nuts, and an abundance and variety of fruit and vegetables. It could include moderate amounts of eggs, dairy, poultry and fish, and very small amounts of meat. And I'll just mention the Lancet Eat diet in a moment. Such a diet would be adequate, i.e. reaching but not exceeding needs in energy and nutrients for growth and development, and would be consistent with WHO guidelines to reduce the risk of diet-related non-communicable diseases. And it would contain minimal levels or none, if possible, pathogens, toxins and other agents that cause foodborne disease. And of course would include clean and safe drinking water as a food choice. In terms of the environmental aspect, it would maintain greenhouse gas emissions and water and land use within set targets. Certainly it would preserve biodiversity. It would minimise the use of antibiotics and hormones throughout the food system, minimise the use of plastics and derivatives in food packaging, and reduce food loss and waste. The socio-cultural aspects, of course, are vital. So such a diet has to be accessible, and it also has to be desirable. It has to be edible. People have to enjoy the taste and enjoy it. And it also has to avoid adverse gender-related impacts, especially with regard to time allocation. I am thinking about women here who have long shouldered the tasks of buying and preparing food. So I think we do have to be careful what we recommend in terms of diets and in terms of cooking. We've got to think about who's going to go and do that cooking and how much time they've got. And sustainable healthy diets need to be built on and respect local culture, culinary practices, knowledge and consumption patterns on a local basis, values on the way the food is sourced, produced and consumed. So what sort of action do we need? As has been alluded to, this is a very, very wicked problem. Coming from very much from a sustainable diet nutrition angle, I think we do need to develop more national food-based dietary guidelines, and these must define context-specific sustainable healthy diets by taking into account all these social, cultural, economic, ecological and environmental circumstances. So they should be, we do have principles globally around sustainable healthy diets, but we do need country-specific dietary guidelines. Such dietary guidelines must ensure that affordable and desirable foods for a sustainable healthy diet are available and accessible for the most vulnerable. So it's very important to address inequities and inequalities. And it's also important to think about the trade-offs. I mentioned there an example of diet in France, which could be very healthy, but would also increase greenhouse gas emissions. And as our speaker from Groningen was talking about, very important to consider strategies for behaviour change, including consumer empowerment and effective nutrition and food education, which I believe dietitians and nutritionists can do. What other action do we need? We need to create an enabling environment, and here I mean through government mechanisms. And we need to think about the existing food systems that we have, particularly in our own countries, and we need to identify potential changes needed to encourage the availability and consumption of a diversity of foods needed for these types of diets. And very important, of course, we need to ensure policy coherence. Policies need to be aligned across all sectors: agriculture, health, education, environment, water, trade, from local to national and to international level. And we need to talk to all actors in society. So, I mean, in short, but in very much in longhand, of course, I think it's very important we need to consider food system transformation. I think both of our speakers already, if not using the phrase, have talked in terms of the need of food system transformation. That's a very busy slide. I'm not going to go through it. The point of showing it at all is that to achieve sustainable, healthy diets, we're going to need food system transformation. It's not going to be a matter of merely advising people what to eat, even though dietitians and nutritionists, I mean, that's what we do, or particularly those of us who see clients personally. But we're going to need a whole food system transformation to achieve sustainable, healthy diets. I will talk ever so briefly about the planetary health plate because I'm going to be running out of time. The Lancet Eat guide has been discussed already, and the sorts of dietary changes that would require for a healthy, sustainable diet. I like the Lancet Commission approach because this did define a healthy reference diet, but within planetary boundaries. So this was both a healthy diet and a sustainable diet. No surprises there. Those are some samples of planetary health plates. Forgive me, I think they veer towards more Northern European type plates, but nonetheless, I think they are plates that we can all identify with. Lots of colour. That's one thing I love to say about sustainable dietary meals, is that they are full of colour. Or eat a rainbow. And yeah, we need to be eating colour. Okay, this was just some work actually, strangely, that I did for the BBC, which I'm sure you know is our main TV broadcasting, well, probably not our main TV broadcasting company nowadays, perhaps less so, but yeah, it's still pretty high up there. And this is some work I did for the BBC in providing a healthy, sustainable diet for a week for a family in South London. This is sort of some of the basis of the work I did, and just finding out what the current UK diet was, what that looked like compared with the Lancet Eat diet. Again, no surprises there. The Lancet Eat diet would actually allow us to eat a bit more fish, more milk, a bit less poultry, of course a lot less red and processed meat, and so on. And the current UK diet, of course, does not achieve that at the moment. So moving swiftly on to what dietitians and nutritionists can do, because I do think dietitians and nutritionists have a big role to play in this, because they are front-facing with the public. So facilitating dietary change by providing information, addressing barriers and highlighting benefits, influencing policy at local, national and international levels, research, education and academia, of course, working with others in a multidisciplinary way. That's something that perhaps nutritionists have not been great at doing up to now, but I think it's certainly something that we need to get on board with. And I think it's very important personally to aim to eat a more sustainable diet and perhaps grow some of your own food. I'm doing that for the first time this year, growing my own food. And perhaps also consider joining citizens' movements. We have those in all our countries. Many of them are interested in food and diet. Sometimes they're more interested in food and diet than we are in nutrition. Most towns and villages have local food groups and those that grow food, and I think it's very important for us to join in with those if we've got the opportunity to do those, and perhaps consider new types of roles with NGOs who could benefit from nutritional input. Many NGOs don't have much nutritional input, and I think nutritionists and dietitians can provide that. It can sometimes not feel a very comfortable place to do it, because people who work in sustainable food often, well, not often, but perhaps don't know where the nutritional input should come from, and they don't know how to access it. And it's important that we as nutritionists really talk in a sympathetic way with groups like that if we decide to join. This is pure advertising. This is the UK's British Dietetic Association. We produced the One Blue Dot document 3 years ago now. The British Dietetic Association, I think, was the first in the world to produce a document to help dietitians around this problem of sustainable, healthy diets. There are other dietetic associations around the world now which have produced position statements on sustainable diets. Italy did it in 2010. The Dietitians of Canada, their dietetic association, did it a couple of years ago in 2020. And the Dietitians of Canada, really, they were doing that around the new food plate for Canada, which also was published at that time. The Dietitians of Australia, I think they have been the most recent, indeed, this year, to produce a position statement on healthy and sustainable diets. So I think there is traction growing, really, amongst dietitians and nutritionists to get involved with something which is still very new for us. You know, we've been giving health advice around diet, but to provide advice around the environment and greenhouse gas emissions and water use and so on, climate change is still pretty new, but there is a growing interest in this area, and I believe that nutritionists and dietitians do have a role. And that is certainly pure advertising, and that is the book that I co-authored with Professor Tim Lang, and we're hoping to do an update for that within the next 12 months to 2 years. Okay, and thank you very much for listening.
And can we order your book on Amazon?
You can indeed, yes.
Well, that's perfect. Thank you so much, Pamela. I loved your presentation. And one question pops to my head is, do you actually have Jamie Oliver's phone number? Because I think we need him. We need to join him in his food revolution. I mean, I remember him having a food revolution where he tried to switch the food canteen, and he even made a video, a music with several actors and famous people trying to engage everyone to change their eating habits. I think this is actually multidisciplinary. It involves every one of us, from the nutritionists to us consumers to the doctors, everyone, and to the producers, to the government, the policy makers. We need to be truly aligned in making these changes from the simple focus on the healthy diets to the focus on the healthy and sustainable diets. We cannot ignore this.
And indeed, as you've said, Cecilia, the media have a really key role. I mean, Jamie Oliver's just put one example, but yes. Yeah, they have a very key role. Yeah.
Yes. They have the power, the capacity to reach millions, while I can't, and neither one of us cannot do. So we really need his phone number, or someone like him that has the voice, the power to speak and to sing. He sang. I'm kidding. Well,
maybe you have already, but maybe you develop your own media person in Portugal.
Maybe we have to try to find.
Actually, I'm sure you do. There will be some.
Yeah, but we have to go beyond the boundaries. We have to do this as a worldwide food revolution.
Yeah, yeah.
Catarina, you have any question for Pamela?
No, we don't have any questions on the chat, but we are exactly on the time to finish this webinar, so I think it's
I don't know if this is a question, but for us nutritionists, we have a huge responsibility, and but we are not learning this yet, maybe in every nutrition course. So we have to go knock on universities' doors to make them change their programs. I have there's one attendee here agreeing with what I'm saying. We have to learn this, right? While we are in university.
Yeah.
So we can spread when we start working, we have to spread the message, because as you said, Pamela, we are out there every day with the consumers. We have to spread the message. It's true. Anyone from the team would like to add anything, or should we finish our webinar for today?
Yeah, maybe we can
just thank you for a great
great
webinar. I was trying to write a question to Pamela, and sorry to be breaking the rules of our webinar and not writing on the chat, but I'm not fast enough. Pamela, I think you mentioned a very important aspect that I discussed a lot with my colleagues, which is about the role of women and how we ourselves, with our busy lives, and with concerns about sustainability, and especially when we have kids, about the health of our kids, how can we do and be able to actually cook and shop and think about a meal that is sustainable. Do you think this should be some concerns also of employers that should take part of this burden that it's only on women? So how can we, because basically we are taking one role that was assigned to women that we simply don't have time to perform it. So what is it? Can you just elaborate on that?
Let's just go back a few years ago. We wanted this. We wanted to be in the workforce. We wanted to be able to work. I mean, from a historical point of view, we emancipated towards this role we have today. But we have to agree it's a huge pressure on us, because we are home runners. We take care of everything in our house. We take care of our jobs, our families. It's a huge pressure, isn't it? That's what you're saying, Claudia.
Yeah, it is, and I think, but I think Claudia is also right in we need to consider other stakeholders who could share this issue. With women, I mean, employers, schools.
There's currently a discussion on the 4-day work week. We have heard the 4-day work week. Is it doable? And if we had more time, maybe we could cook more. Maybe, for example, if I had more time, I didn't need to buy the yogurts. Maybe I could prepare the yogurts myself. That would be a benefit. But is it doable from the economic point of view?
Yeah.
This is some questions we need to raise. I think we have a question from our audience. I have been following, I think this is the question you raised your hand, Chris. I have been following all the seminars, and all the speakers and presentations have been very relevant. Oh, this is a thank you very much. Congratulations to all, and looking forward to continuing the conversations. I don't know, Chris, you have raised your hand.
Yes, it was just for a quick comment. So I think that a lot of research is being doing, a lot of studies, a lot of interesting studies, but I still feel there is a separation between what is going on PhD programs and a lot of studies and the rest of society. So I think that there's a lot of breaking through discoveries, a lot of things that are valid knowledge, that it's not going through the rest of society. So I think that there's still bridges need to be built between the knowledge that is produced in universities and the political decisions and the education. So I think that we have a lot of things to do, and because we take so much time planning and not doing anything, I think that we will all die before there is something done on real time. But that's just
let's hope not. Let's hope that we can still see some change happening soon, and let's hope that Food for Sustainability will have an important role in this change. Both me and Catarina, we are nutritionists, and we were talking early today that what we want to see from our work here at Food for Sustainability is actually people changing their focus. They focus from solely the healthy diets to the healthy and sustainable diets. That's our role here.
Yeah.
So
congratulations for the initiative.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I believe I will be able to close this webinar. We are already a little bit late. I will just remember the next week's theme. If you want to come again, we will be talking about practical examples of sustainable and healthy diet through meal schools, public food procurement, and food education. So hopefully we will be seeing each other again. Thank you so much once again. It was a pleasure having you here.
Thank you. Good luck with your webinar.
Thank you.
Bye.
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 Thank you.